Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Assyrianism class. And this session is going to be on poets, particularly revolutionary poets, poets who have, over a period of time, played a central role in kind of waking up Assyrians. And we're going to look at two poets who are very important in particular, and that is Ninos Aho and Yousip. One coming from originally from Iran in the east part of Assyria, you could say, or Eastern Assyrian, and one who came originally from the western part of Assyria. And both had a very important role in the formation of, say, the thoughts on Assyrianism among many people. Now, it's important to ask, like, what's the significance of poets? What do they do? And we're looking here, these images, at some very important poets who sort of, particularly Mahmoud Darwish, a Palestinian, and the others here. What is it that they do? What is it that they awaken with the human spirit inside of people that is important about them? And we're going to look at these two examples, but let's kind of get together the theoretical underpinnings, the pattern that exists here about these poets, and understand what is it that they evoke among people. First and foremost, these poets, both Ninos Aho and Yousip, provide inspiration and motivation. There's an emotional connection with people that they have. Their poetry is evocative, it is revolutionary, it is new. Although they come from a line of Assyrian poets, and Assyrian poets have played a very important role over the ages, including, of course, in religious circles, the churches that Assyrians have, the Church of the East, the Syriac Orthodox Church, the Chaldean Church, the Syriac Catholic Church, all of these, the what we call traditional Assyrian churches, have had poetry as a way to express their Christology, their thoughts on various topics. And so we can go back in time to the great Mar Aprim Suryaya, for example, Mar Aprim the Great, who wrote all of his thoughts on faith through poetry. Isaac of Nineveh, Marnase Kinnarat Rucha, wrote tremendous amounts on poetry. And these people brought about greater faith among their followers through the works of poetry. And so Ninos Aho and Yousip are proceeding in this line, but they are new in their thoughts. Now the focus is Assyrianism. It is not religion. So inspiration and motivation, awareness and education, highlighting the injustice that Assyrians have faced. These revolutionary poets draw attention to societal issues, rights of women, for example, among Assyrians, the rights of Assyrians within larger societies, and so on. Cultural and ideological influence is also a factor in their works. They contribute to the development and spread of new ideologies of Assyrianism by articulating its principles and visions of Assyrianism. And they create a collective sense of identity among the participants, those who listen to them. Historical documentation, they provide poetry, and this is particularly true of Yousip, who goes back and has a lot of poetry on Shamiram, the ancient Assyrian queen, for example, talks about historical epochs of persecution and so on and so forth. So they record these historical narratives of Assyrians in a way that is favorable to Assyrians, one could say, in a way that one could say establishes the legitimacy of Assyrianism. There's empowerment and agency, giving voice to the voiceless. Poets often speak to those or for those who cannot give voice to their oppressed situation, who are marginalized and oppressed, who are persecuted. This can empower Assyrians, of course, making them feel seen and heard and recognized and legitimated by others. And of course, there's global influence here among the works of these poets. So, inspiration and motivation, awareness and education among their people, cultural and ideological influence, a new way of thinking, if you will, historical documentation, such as we refer to the works of Yousip et Yousip, empowerment and agency, and global influence. Who was Ninos Aho? Ninos Aho was born in the area of Tur Abdin. Tur Abdin, of course, an ancient Assyrian settlement going back to the time of Ashur-nasir-pal II, even further than that. There are now findings, historical findings of Assyrians going back to this area to Tuglat-Pileser I. So we're talking over 1000 BC. So he's born on April 24th, 1945, in the village of Gerge Shammo in Syria. And then to Qamishli, migrated to Qamishli and later Damascus as he pursued his education. He joined a movement which was created in 1957, the Assyrian Democratic Organization, Taqasta Demokrateta Atureta. And in 1961, he joined it, in 1961 during an underground convention. This movement was, although classified as a political party, really it sought to bring together the various sects of Assyrians, from members of the Church of the East, the Syriac Orthodox, and so on and so forth, all of these sects, to bring them back together. In 1971, he came to the US, having left Syria. And then after living in the United States for over 20 years, he went back to Syria again to be in touch with his homeland. And we're going to look at some of the poetry that is going to reflect his love of his Assyrian homeland, his village, his earth, his geography. He wrote prolifically, and he wrote in both the dialects of Western and Eastern, and various poems that, and there's a theme in all of these poems that transcends the differences between Assyrians and rises to the level of advocating Assyrianism in his part. In 2013, Ninos unfortunately succumbed to complications of non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and he passed away. And his funeral was in the Syriac Orthodox Church, but a bishop of the Church of the East came. So even in his funeral, it was a very symbolic moment of bringing, say, Eastern and Western Assyria together, as it were. He was the son of a farmer. His village was located on the border, as it so happened with many Assyrians who advocate for Assyrianism. It happened that the borders of the Sykes-Picot and the division of the Middle East had destroyed their villages or had divided their people. And so his village was one of those sort of divided. And he recalls that we would look at the people of the other village and see them working and farming, but we could not talk. And this formed ideas of how Assyrians were separated by the great powers and later by these regional powers that dominated the Assyrian heartland and ripped it asunder, as it were, geographically dividing its people. And his poetry, although we hear a lot about, and we will hear the ideas expressed in his Assyrianist poetry. Very important to also know how much love he had as a person who described himself as the son of farmers, how much love he had for his geography. And here is one where he expresses so much love for the earth and the grain of wheat. But try to see the love of his Assyrian people and his Assyrian heartland coming through the expressions about nature here. A grain of wheat, a field of stalks, a plain of bales. I plant them in the eye of the sun in the villages. I water them with my tears and the river, so that our love will grow and thrive in hearts. My beloved, I have journeyed to the whole world, or I have journeyed the whole world. I have searched the entire land, but I did not hear the sound of millstones, nor the silos of cracked wheat like ours. So again, the homeland. The wind brought your letter, and it carried me from this world to another. Was I dreaming or awake? I don't know. In your spellbinding beauty, I shall become intoxicated. A glass of wine and cigarettes. I will not count until the day comes when the grains are ripe and the stalks grow and the millstones transform into the moon and the grape, and the cigarette changes into a candle and a golden glow, for there to be light, for there to be gathering, for there to be a vision. And this vision was, of course, the vision of a united homeland, a people living on their earth, free and farming and being together as a nation. And this runs throughout his poetry. And here we look at an example of Aturayo Tarikh, written in the Eastern dialect, the Assyrian and history. He's speaking here, it's a dialogue, which is very, very typical of both ancient Assyrian and also what we call classical Syriac poetry, where a dialogue takes place in the hope of teaching a lesson. So it's kind of a dialectic here. Be ashamed of yourself, he says to history. The Assyrian says to history, lower your head, remain silent. I have no faith in you. As much as you promise, I will not believe. You are a treacherous friend, a treacherous friend. In the beginning, I gave you wisdom and learning. Thousands of your pages I completed and dispersed. And in the end, you betrayed me and dispersed my brother and sister. Is a reference to how history has led to the Assyrians being dispersed all over. There will come a day when oops. Sorry, here, we're going to have to stop 1 second.
Take your time. I can just edit this out.
Yeah, I just wanted to, okay, I can move this. So annoying. Okay. There will come a day when I will remind you, he says to history, of the great error you have committed against me. The day of the elders in the mountains will yield the return of the young. The day women will give birth to healthy newborns. When girls in villages carry weapons. It's an ideal version of everyone struggling together. When the dead shall rise from the graves and all look upon you and judge you and spit in your face. Very harsh kind of treatment of how the history, how he sees the narration of others about Assyrian history. You are a traitor. You are a traitor. And in one voice loudly state, the sun will rise from the east once more. The flag of Assyria we will plan in the heart of the sun. We, we shall with our blood and strength write our history. So kind of taking back Assyrian history. I took a responsibility upon myself and traveled the world, thinking on the cause of my people. What sin have they committed? Winter in a year is 3 months. Why is the winter of my people 2,600 years? And if this is so, why have we not vanished? Why do we remain? This is a sign that I must live on. So here it's very important to see how the collective and the one come together, how the one is rendered significant by the significance of the collective. The larger nation over time and space is how the person sees himself. He personifies his own existence in the entire nation. And so he says, and if this is so, why have we not vanished? Why do we remain? This must be a sign that I must live on, not just live on as an individual, by the way, but live on as a symbol or an extension of the collective, of the larger Assyrian entity. And so from that comes a duty. That duty is to do what is best for the collective. But for me to live on, I must create power, economic power, spiritual power, cultural power, a power of the rod, qatiya, and the staff. But I cannot create this unless I create the passion. So, what he was saying in his poetry there is that we must have the spirit as Assyrians to support the collective, to support Assyrianism. And through supporting Assyrianism, we create a stronger existence for our people and for us as individuals. And here we see again the new Assyrian, Aturaya Khata, which he, since the 70s, he advocated this idea from the heart of fire, in other words, the difficulties that the Assyrians have gone through, from the depth of the deep, min umqat umqa, from under the boulder, min khutqaya ukipa, on the face of the mountain, from the voice of the clouds in the heavens, the new Assyrian was born. From the weight of thousands of years, from hunger and thirst and want, from the lies of history, from the merchants of gold and nation. Today he is finished. For those who deny rights, for those who persecute nations, his greeting is a bullet and a bomb, meaning the rejection of those who reject him, of those who persecute him, of those who persecute other nations. Here we're talking kind of in a global way, although it's centered on Assyrians, it's the rebirth of the Assyrian who has been persecuted and alienated and marginalized by others. A new Assyrian is born, meaning he is resisting the difficulties, he is overcoming the challenges. For those who deny themselves, he has more. For those who deny themselves, what is he talking about here? For those who deny their Assyrianism, he has more. If you ask him, where do you come from? What place and what church? And here we're talking about sectarianism. He addresses this. He will answer you with sincerity. This is the new Assyrian. This is the ideal Assyrian. Neither Atyari or neither Atyari nor Athuma. Neither Atyari nor Athuma. Not this Assyrian tribe and not that Assyrian tribe. A Jacobite, a Chaldean, an Nestorian, a Presbyterian, I am not. In a loud voice, he will tell you, I am an Assyrian only. How will he live? What will he wear? Where will he die? He cares not. So what comes as the most important thing, what is the most inspiring thing for this new Assyrian, this ideal Assyrian, is his oneness, stressing the oneness of his nationhood and fighting sectarianism, fighting tribalism, and rising above it all with his new Assyrianism. And so he cares not about the difficulties he faces. He does not know about his clothing. He does not know about his grave. He does not care as to where he lives. He cares not. After him will come other young men, and they will carry weapons and tell the truth. In other words, they will struggle and they will continue this truth. What is this truth? This is the truth of Assyrianism. So here we see the importance of not the individual, but this chain that is throughout Assyrianism, throughout time, I should say, in the Assyrian nation of different people coming and going, but the nation remains the same. It struggles, it goes through difficulties, but it rises above with this new Assyrian now. With a heart, with a full heart and his book with him, meaning he knows his history. He wanders and preaches of the church of Assyria, Itat Ator, the nature, Kianat Ator, the nature of Assyria, the power and blood and name of Ashur, which encompasses all Assyrians. And he says, I was born before this earth and this sun. I was born before time. I have no death. I have no evening nor sunset. I am the star of Assyria glimmering in Bitnahran. I am God Ashur, turning the ages. I have been the light unto the nations. Is it true that today I no longer am? Little by little, I am disappearing? No, 1,000 times no. Assyria shall remain, and time will stand still. Assyria shall remain, and the ziggurat will rise. Assyria shall remain, and history will worship it. Assyria shall remain and never fall. So, what he's talking about, Ninos, to end on this note, is uh, Assyria here signifies the Assyrian people. It's not necessarily a land, not a political entity, but the Assyrian, the continuation of the Assyrian people. It shall remain and never fall, meaning the Assyrian shall never disappear, and Assyrianism will never, ever end. With the passion, of course, that he talked about, with the increase of cultural power and economic power, and so on and so forth, that Assyrianism will go on. Remember that he's talking about he doesn't care where he lives. So, in other words, Assyrianism survives everywhere. He doesn't care what he is going through physically himself, because what's important is the nation, the existence of the nation in time and space. It continues on through its people who are aware. That was the message of Ninos Aho. What about Yousip bit Yousip? What kind of poetry did he advocate? Who was he? He was born in Urmia in 1942. He learned early on, learned Assyrian and came close to Assyrian culture and poetry, but also learned the poetry of others, Turkish, Kurdish, and so on and so forth. He interacted with other people. He joined in 1960 the Nineveh Choir, conducted by Maestro Nebo Isabe in Tehran. This was, of course, during the time of a flowering of Assyrian culture and heritage. It's what we call the golden age of Assyrian literature in the 1960s, 1950s, 60s, where a lot of Assyrian books were produced, among them books of poetry. And so he was an important component in that. In 1979, he moved to Turlock, California, and he was an active member of the Assyrian American Civic Club in Turlock and responsible for its TV operation. And then he moved later to San Jose and became an active member of the Assyrian American Association. He's always been active. He continues to live in California to this day and continues to produce his poetry. He's written extensively. He's one of the most literate of Assyrian poets, and he's written extensively. And his thoughts, his writings early on, one could say, were a bit controversial with many Assyrians because he challenged, like Ninos Aho, the status quo. He wrote on religious topics and rejected the rejection of the ancient Assyrians in Christian worship, specifically by Assyrians, but later sort of came around and was seemed to be more accepting. But his poetry is very powerful, and he, like many of those who advocated for Assyrianism, always went back um, to sort of situate where the Assyrians draw their strength from, which is from the ancient past, when Assyrians were a powerful people, when they created so much in art and literature and administration and power and sophistication, to kind of bring it forward to overcome the difficulties of the Assyrians, particularly after the First World War, and even before, when the Assyrians became victims of others. So here's an example of the power of his poetry, a prayer of the Assyrian nation today, of the Assyrian today. With your power, O Ashur. Here we go again to the original ancient Assyrian faith. With your power, O Ashur, God of truth and our creator, Beriana, with your fiery radiance and luminous strength, win over this continuous nightfall, Chishka, in other words, that has kept our nation in Satan's nest. Give power to allow our tree to bear fruit so that its roots are protected as you commanded. Enlighten our views, reinforce our unity, strengthen our will so that we are able to keep the tablets and bones of those at rest. In other words, to keep our ancient history within us. This is our unforgettable goal. Amen. So, simple prayer says a lot about connecting the ancient Assyrians, recognizing their difficulties, reinforcing their unity, and proceeding forward as a people, as a stronger people. This is his prayer. Holy and blessed land of Ashur, your grounds cover the bones of my forefathers. My being was perfected through your flowing essence. My identity is authentic through your heritage. In my heart of hearts, I am yearning for the day that your flag waves once more again. I will eternally strive to that end until the last moment of my final breath. So we see this prayer, which is dedicated to Nadam Yonadam. Nadam Yonadam was an Assyrian who was killed in Iraq in 2003, and he was one of those who had joined Yousip and others in kind of advocating the return to ancient Assyrian ideas and faith, even, um, although not totally rejecting the Christian faith. One could say perhaps purifying it with the ancient Assyrian past. So that's another sample of the thought process here. And also, he wrote the Assyrian, now what is known as the Assyrian anthem, which was performed through the Assyrian Cultural Association, was performed as through the Chicago Philharmonic. And it is truly a very powerful, musical creation. And here we see to honor that noble name, Qarum Ramit Shimmarama, of our nation Assyria, we stand and salute, in salute. She that became the cradle of civilization. Again, recognizing the greatness of Assyria. For the honor of our forefathers, they that went forth to the world. In other words, the Assyrians preached and benefited the entire world. Again, recall the poetry of Ninos Aho, recognizing the greatness of the Assyrian past that benefited humanity. They that cultured this humanity so that she may live in peace for eternity. In other words, they were a force for good, the ancient Assyrians, and prosper in abundance and rise by the Lord in greatness, so that Assyria can rise again. So it's a small prayer within the Assyrian national anthem in the interest of generating Assyrian strength and a new Assyrian awareness. Now, I said, and this is kind of an interesting observation about Yousip. I said that he had changed his thoughts. And then this interview, which is the last one that I've seen from him, um, he begins to have a different way of looking at things. And he says, our quest for a homeland is a situation that tests our own humanity. Think about these words. I mean, this is a poet speaking these words. Even if we had our land back, we would still have to be neighbors with people who have lived on our lands and on their own neighboring lands for centuries. Should we push others off the land they live on to reclaim our own? Should we displace other people as we have experienced? Seeking a homeland is our right, but it brings with it difficult questions that require answers that are compatible with our Christian faith. So he's come kind of full circle. But I would say, in wrapping up this class, I would say that Assyrianism can be distinguished from what I have termed Assyrian nationalism. And I've repeated this in this class. And that is that Assyrianism really is going back to the ancient past and inspiring modern Assyrians about their past as each individual and advocating kind of a collective life for the Assyrian in preserving their culture and their heritage, but not necessarily drawing maps, not necessarily creating a military to create borders, not necessarily going back to the old model of the nation state. That's what distinguishes Assyrianism from Assyrian nationalism. It is the idea, as expressed here by Yousip in his kind of final or twilight years, and that is that what we advocate for is not physical violence. We don't advocate for the creation of borders. What we advocate for is an idea within us. Wherever we live, we maintain it. We advocate for a strengthening of this culture of oneness among our people, but not of creating violence, not of displacing neighbors from their lands. Thank you. See you next time.